Today's daf is Lamed Aleph in Yoma. We are at the top of the page, we're a second line. We're in the middle of a discussion between Abaye and Rav Yosef. Amar le Abaye Rav Yosef. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, "Biya b'miktzat shema biya or lo." If a person comes part way into the Beit HaMikdash, is it considered coming in or not? Okay, it's right here. See, olo, right? So is it considered coming in or not? So the question is, of course, for tevilah. A person has to do tevilah, they have to immerse in a mikveh. According to Rashi, this is going according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that a person always has to go to the mikveh if he's going to go into the Beit HaMikdash. Right? We've been talking about Rabbi Yehuda's position. So we asked last time, chotzet, or chotzet, do the rules of chatzitza apply to this immersion since it's only rabbinic according to Rabbi Yehuda? Now we're asking, does a person who comes in part way have to do tevilah? Okay, he only has to put in his arm. Should he have to do tevilah to put his arm in? So Amar Lei said to him, "Behonot yochicho shen biya b'miktzat v'tanya mitzora tovel v'omed b'shar nikanor." We learned on the previous daf that if a mitzora comes to the Beit HaMikdash on the 8th day of his purification, we know that he has to put his thumb in. He does the hokey pokey, he puts his thumb in, he puts his toe in. And they put the blood and the oil on his toe, on his thumb, etc. So this application of blood and oil, he's standing outside the Beit HaMikdash. He's standing at the gate, just putting his hand in. And yet, what does it say? Tovel ve'omed b'shar nikanor. He has to go to the mikveh in order to participate, even though he's not completely coming into the Beit HaMikdash. Only his thumb is going in. Only his toe is going in. So that shows you that even a partial entry into the Beit HaMikdash is also considered entering. And then we ask another question. They asked another question. Maushi says Sakina Rukav Yishchot. A similar question. Can a person make a very long knife? Let's say he says, "Listen, I'm tameh, but I really want to do shechita on this korban. It's my korban. I want to do shechita." So can he stand outside, take a very long knife, like Crocodile Dundee knife, right? He stands outside and he does shechita from outside. Because we learn, Rashi brings that there's a halacham that you don't have to be standing in the Azara. You don't have to be standing in the courtyard of the Beit HaMikdash in order to do a korban. It says, Ben bakar lefnei Hashem, velo hashochet lefnei Hashem. Right? It always says, bring the ben bakar, bring the animal in front of Hashem. It doesn't say the person who's doing shechita has to be in front of Hashem. Meaning he doesn't have to be in the Beit HaMikdash. So the question is, that's true that he doesn't have to physically be in the Beit HaMikdash, but does he have to be tahor? Does he have to be pure? Okay? In other words, does he have to go to the mikveh in order to do that? So Tibai le ben zoma, Tibai le Rabbanan. Tepligi alei de Rabbi Yehuda. You can ask this question whether according to Ben Zoma or according to the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda. What was Ben Zoma's position? Ben Zoma's position is that a person, in order to go into the Beit HaMikdash any given day, even if they are not tameh, must do tevilah. He learned that from the case of the Kohen Gadol. When he switches his clothing, he has to do tevilah in between each one. So when a person goes from one holy thing to another holy thing, he has to do tevilah. Certainly when he goes from chol to kodesh, he has to do tevilah. That was what Ben Zoma said. The rabbis that disagree with Rabbi Yehuda say that the average person doesn't require tevilah unless there's a reason to think that they have been negligent and they became tameh. And Rabbi Yehuda has the middle position. He says, most people, we assume that they need to be reminded. They need to do tevilah. Okay? But the mitzorah, since last night he already did tevilah, we assume that he's been careful. Right? The chachamim say no. In the case of the mitzorah, we're stringent. We say that he's not going to be careful. But in every other case, we assume that we give you the benefit of the doubt. So in other words, according to both is the question. Do you need to do tevilah if you're going to do shechita and korban? Why is it a question according to both? Because, as follows. You can ask Tiba ela ben Zoma. You can ask according to Ben Zoma. Ad kan lo mechayev ben Zoma el legavai ala valibara elo. That when did Ben Zoma say that any person who's going to enter the Beit HaMikdash has to do tevilah, even if they don't know that they have any tumah, even if they know that they're completely tahor, they have to do it. That was only if you're actually going to step into the Beit HaMikdash. But here we're talking about somebody who's standing outside. He's doing shechita from afar. He's doing a distance shechita. That he might say is okay. O dilma, or maybe Ben Zoma will say that there's a possibility that you're going to step into the Beit HaMikdash. You're going to want to get closer to position yourself better. You're going to end up walking in. And therefore, he says you need to do tevilah. Even though you're not stepping in. So that's a question according to Ben Zoma and according to the rabbis. The rabbis that argue with Rabbi Yehuda and say that the average person has the benefit of the doubt. We assume he doesn't need to do tevilah. But still, we would say, what were they talking about there? Ad kan lo kamrei Rabbanan. Until now, the rabbis only said hatam over there. De lo kavid avid avodah. They were talking about somebody who's just coming into the Beit HaMikdash, not somebody participating in the service. De lo avid avodah. Someone who's not doing the service. But here you're doing shechita. You're slaughtering the korban. How can you not be tahor? So even the rabbis will say, we're going to make that person do tevilah. So when do they give a person the benefit of the doubt? When they're just coming to go into the Beit HaMikdash. We don't say, oh, you probably are tamei and you don't realize it, so we're going to make you do tevilah. No, we don't say that. We say we assume you have the benefit of the doubt. But if you're coming to do avodah, if you're coming to serve, we say then definitely you have to do tevilah. O dilma, or maybe lo shena. It doesn't make a difference. And the rabbis say that whether you're coming to enter the Beit HaMikdash or you're coming to serve in the Beit HaMikdash, in both cases, we give you the benefit of the doubt and you don't have to do tevilah.
Is the implication of this that when you are just standing inside the Beit HaMikdash and you're in a state of tum'ah, then that's a prohibition there?
You're not allowed to enter the Beit HaMikdash tameh.
But is that the Rabbanan?
No, they were right there, you're not allowed to enter. Okay. But the question is, when do we give, is there a difference in standards? In other words, do we give you the benefit of the doubt for coming in? But serving will be stricter. Right.
If the difference is not between the Oraita and the Rabbanan, where is the difference?
That's actually a very good question. I don't know the exact answer to that question. That's a good question. Why should we make a distinction between coming in and doing avodah? Right, because they're both deoraita. So why would we give somebody? Why would we be more concerned about somebody who's going to be tamei for doing the service than somebody who comes in? Since coming in tamei is also prohibited. Right. It's a very good question. I don't know the answer offhand. We have to think about that more. But teku, it's left as a question anyway. So whether according to Ben Zoma or according to the rabbis, in other words, Ben Zoma is the more strict one. He says that anybody who's going to come into the Beit HaMikdash on any day, even if they know they're tahor, have to do tevilah. And yet he might say that if you're not actually going in and you're doing with a long knife, you're going to do shechita. He might say you don't need to, or he might say you do. We're not sure. And according to the rabbis, who normally say that to go in you don't need to go to the mikveh because we give you the benefit of the doubt, here, they might say it's different because, listen, you're actually participating in the avodah. It's a different level. Now, why is that a different level? Is a good question. Now the Gemara goes on. That it says that the Kohen Gadol has to do 5 tevilot, 5 immersions in the mikveh, and 10 times that he has to wash his hands and feet. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught in the Braita, 5 tevilot v'asar kiddushin tovel kohen gadol u'mekadesh bo bayom. On Yom Kippur, we're talking about, he has to immerse 5 times, and he has to wash his hands and feet 10 times. V'chulan b'kodesh b'bet parva. All of them are in the kodesh. In other words, they're on the precincts of the Beit HaMikdash, on the roof of a chamber called the Bet parva, as we learned before. Chutz merishona, except for the very first one, shahita b'chol, which was in the chol. In other words, it was in a place that was not sanctified. Al gabe shar hamayim, which was on top of what was called the water gate, not Watergate the hotel, but Watergate, which was where they brought the water in for the nisuch hamayim, for the libation of water on Sukkot. Now, why is it different? So Rashi had explained on the previous daf that the reason why the first tevilah is different is because that's a tevilah that he's not doing as part of the Yom Kippur avodah. That's a tevilah that anybody who comes to the Beit HaMikdash has to do. Anybody who comes goes to the mikveh before they go. So too, he goes to the mikveh before he goes. Now, there's an argument: is it rabbinic? Is it biblical? That was the argument between Ben Zoma and Rabbi Yehuda. But still, the bottom line is that he does it not as part of the avodah, but as a precursor to the avodah. So that's why it can be done in chol. It can be done not in the actual sanctified area of the Beit HaMikdash. And it was next to lishkato. It was next to his chamber. In other words, that mikveh where he would immerse, it was next to the chamber where he would stay during the time of his separation because there were 2 mikvahot. There was a mikveh on the Shar HaMayim, and there was a mikveh that was located on top of the Bet HaParva. The one on the top of the Bet HaParva is in the Kodesh. The one that's on top of the Shar HaMayim is in Chol, in a place that's not sanctified. And that was close to his Lishka. That was close to the place where he would stay during the 7 days of separation that he kept before Yom Kippur. Now, Amar Abaye said, Shema mina en etam Gavoa mikarka azara 23 amot. We can figure out from this that en etam, which was, as the Rashi explains the details that this appears actually in Sefer Yehoshua, it was a certain kind of a spring or a natural spring or stream that provided water to this mikveh. He says you could tell that it was 23 amot elevation above the floor of the Azara. How do we know that? In other words, there was this spring was on a mountain that was higher than the Har HaBayit. Okay, it's in a higher location and it trickled downwards because water doesn't trickle upwards, it comes downwards. Right? Water always flows down. So it's 23 amot higher in elevation than the floor of the Beit HaMikdash. How do we know that? As we learned in the Mishnah, because we learned that all of the doorways in the Beit HaMikdash were 20 amot high and 10 amot wide, except for the ulam. The ulam was the antechamber that led to the Kodesh inside the Beit HaMikdash. V'tanya, we learned in a Braita, that what does it mean that he has to wash his hands b'mayim, in water? What does it mean about the Kohen that he has to wash himself in water? It means in the water of mikveh. Kol bisaro, his entire body. Mayim shekol gufo ole bahen. That a mikveh, in order to qualify, has to be large enough that his entire body could fit inside. V'chamahen amma al amma birum gimel amot. That means that it has to be 1 amma by 1 amma at the height of 3 amot. We've learned this several times, and they measured that. B'sheru chachamim be'mikveh 40 se'ah, and that will include a volume of 40 se'ah of water. So what's the point? In order to have a mikveh of 40 se'ah of water, you have to have 3 amot in height. So now, so what is Abaye saying? Abaye is saying that what does this mean? That from the top of this mikveh until the floor of the Azara is how much? 23 amot, because it's 20 amot to the top of the gate. And then the mikveh was on top of the gate, and it was 3 amot high. So if it was 3 amot high on the top of the gate, that means you have 23 amot. And the stream that's feeding into this mikveh has to be above it. So it has to be at least 23 amot high. This stream that's going into the Beit HaMikdash. Vayika amma tikra va'ama ma'azeva. But what about the amma that is on top of the gate? In other words, from the bottom of the gate until the solid part of the gate. In other words, the lintel, whatever you want to call it, of the door, that's 20 amot. The space is 20 amot. But there's actually a piece on top of the gate. Right? That's the tikra. And ma'azeva, there's also something, the floor of the mikveh must take up space. So how could you say it's exactly 23 amot? It's not exactly 23 amot. The doorway is 23 amot, but look, you have a lintel on top of the doorway. Like here, you could measure the doorway, the space of the doorway, but then you have that piece on top where the dedication is affixed to, that part of it, right? What about that? And then you have, on top of that, the floor of the mikveh. Doesn't that take up space?
They call that tikra.
Ma'azeva is what they're calling on top of that. No, the tikra is the normally, but it means the roof of the gate. You know, they're using it could be called a mashkoftim, but maybe there was not a door, so it didn't call that. I don't know. But anyway,
the water was falling.
The water was on a stream that flowed into this mikveh somewhere, so it had to be higher than the mikveh because it had to flow down into it. Right? It had to be. They had to direct this water into there. So now. So the Beit HaMikdash kevan the shishaninhu b'mashu abdilahu. The answer is that since these gates were made of marble, so the amount on the top was a very tiny amount. Because marble is so strong, you didn't need a thick roof and a thick floor of the mikveh to hold the mikveh up. Even a thin amount would be enough, and therefore it didn't come into the count. But what about that tiny amount? Since it wasn't at least an amma, he didn't count it. In other words, he was telling you roughly 23 amot. It's really 23 and change. 23 and a little bit more, the height of the spring. But 23 roughly, because roughly from the bottom of the floor to the top of the mikveh is 23 amot. It's 23 point something amot.
1 amma is about 16 inches, right?
And amma is about 6. It's about what?
More than.
And amma is like 1.5 feet. Yeah,
Right.
it's 18 inches, yeah.
16, 18 inches, right?
About 1.5 feet. So the Gemara says, Parsus adin shel butz, they would drape around the mikveh some linen curtains for the Kohen to have privacy. Why did they use linen? Like they've said in other places about other practices that they did on Yom Kippur, to remind everyone, to make it clear that the service of the day is in linen garments. In other words, they emphasize the theme of linen in the Beit HaMikdash that day because the Kohen was going to be serving in those pure white linen garments that he used for the service of Yom Kippur. So that's why they used a white linen curtain around the mikveh when he went into to immerse. So the Mishnah says, Pashat yarad v'taval alav v'nistabag, which should sound familiar, right? He took off his clothes, he went down to do tevilah, he got up and he dried himself off. The first thing they did was bring him the golden garments, v'lavash, and he put them on. This is the beginning of Avodat Yom Kippurim. Okay? He put the golden garments on. V'kidesh yadav v'raglav. He washed his hands and feet after putting on the golden clothing. Heviu lo et tamid. They brought him the korban tamid karatzo. He began to slice what he. Now remember, the thing is that the Kohen Gadol has to, according to the Rambam and seemingly most of the Rishonim, although there is some machloket about some aspects of this, but the simplest way to read it is that the Kohen Gadol had to do all of the avodah of Yom Kippur, everything. It all had to be b'Kohen Gadol. So therefore, he had to do the shechita, but he also had to do the Kabbalah. Meaning, he had to slaughter the animal, but also receive the blood. That's not so easy. Right? So what did he do? He cut the 2 simanim, the minimum of the trachea and esophagus that he has to cut. In other words, he has to cut those 2, the windpipe and the esophagus has to be cut in order for it to be a good shechita. The majority of them has to be cut. He would do the minimum amount of the majority of each. Then he would give it to somebody else to complete. Umerek acher, shechita al yado, and somebody else would finish it. In other words,
there is no. I mean, once you
meaning he only would do that. They slice the whole way.
I mean, it has
right?
To be like the whole
but
way.
as soon as he slices the majority of each, somebody else would finish it, so the rest of the blood would drain
What
out.
is
Finish cutting more, because you only have to cut 51% of it, of each one of the 2 simanim. So as soon as he got the minimum coverage, somebody else would take the knife and finish it, and he would be receiving the blood into the vessel.
And that doesn't affect because it has to be such a
Coordinated. No, because once you have the majority of it done, it doesn't matter anymore. It only matters for that first 51% of the simanim.
In other words,
but the rest of it,
where the animal is for sure dead.
Right, exactly.
Right? So
he's not only mostly dead, like in Princess Bride.
Right. Okay, so the animal is for sure dead. Then what?
Halachically, he's dead already, so they just want to drain the rest of the blood, so they continue the shechita. So the rest of the blood will come out.
In other words, that more blood will come out.
Right.
You need to cut more.
Right. That's all. I think that's the only reason. Yeah. So because the Kohen Gadol has to now grab. So it says, and umerek acher shechita al yado, and somebody else would complete the shechita al yado. Al yado, Rashi says, either means next to him, or either it means bishvilo for him, or it's saying next to him and after him. Okay. That's what it means, al yado, through him. What does it mean, through him? Through the Kohen Gadol. That means either next to the Kohen Gadol would be standing another person, or it means that for the Kohen Gadol, somebody else would complete the process, and then he would receive the blood. V'kibel et adam uzrako. He would receive the blood, throw it on the altar. Nichnas laktir kitor shel shachar. He would go in to burn the incense of the morning, ulehetiv et hanirot, and in order to set up the candles of the menorah, ulakriv et harosh v'et evarim. It should say, and he would then go to offer the rosh and the evarim, the various limbs of the korban tamid, and then the chavitin. Then he would bring the mincha offering of the Kohen Gadol. That every day the Kohen Gadol had to bring a mincha offering, anyways, and then v'yatayayin, and then he would bring the wine offering, the wine libation that accompanied the korban tamid. So far, he's basically doing what we would call the avodat tamid. The daily service of the morning. This is the korban tamid. He did shechita. He applied the blood. He did the ketoret. He then brought the evarim, brought the limbs of the korban tamid up to the top of the mizbeach, up to the top of the altar. Then he brought his own mincha and the wine offering. All of these are part of the daily regular service. That's why he's wearing the big day zahav. He's wearing the golden clothing, because the golden clothing means this is the regular daily service. The 8 begadim of the Kohen Gadol. All of the fancy stuff that we read about in Parashat Tetzaveh of the Big Day Kehuna. So he's wearing those for this part of it. Okay, because it's the daily service. And then he says, Ketor shel shachar hayta kreva ben dam le'evarim. Shel ben harbayim ben evarim le'nesachim. There was a difference between the timing of when the ketoret was brought in the morning and the afternoon. In the morning, the ketoret was brought between the dam and the evarim, as we see here. After applying the blood to the altar, then he went to do the ketoret, and then he brought the limbs of the tamid onto the altar. Okay, so in the middle of doing the Korban Tamid, he took a break, so to speak, to do the Ketoret in the morning. However, in the afternoon, it was between the Evarim and Nisachim. In other words, in the afternoon, he would complete the Korban Tamid, blood and also limbs would go up to the altar, and then he would go to do the Ketoret, and then bring the wine and the flour offerings that accompanied the Korban Tamid, which is the other half of his personal offering, as well as the wine that would be applied to the altar. So there's a difference in order in the morning and the afternoon. If the Kohen Gadol was old, or he was very sensitive to the cold, then they would have to heat up the water for him, because remember, the mikvaot, they didn't have a heated sauna or a heated jacuzzi mikvah like we have today, that you go in, it's nice and warm, heated pool. They didn't have that. It was freezing maybe. So what did they do? Then they would heat up hot water. They would heat up water and they would pour it into the cold water. So they would heat it up before Yom Kippur. They would have it on the fire and they would pour it in there to take the chill off of the mikveh. Okay, we're going to see more about this in the Gemara.
How do they keep it? How do they keep it?
Yerushalayim, no, they don't keep it. Yerushalayim is so cold.
Yeah, it's cold during the fall and winter.
They heat it up before Yom
About
Kippur.
30 years ago, we went to Yerushalayim.
On a fire. What do you mean? They have on a fire.
Oh.
They could keep a fire, like a blech or whatever, like a hot, like you do for Shabbat. Right. Keep it over the fire. So now the Gemara says, Amro Rabbanan Kamed Rav Papa. The rabbi said in front of Rav Papa, Ha delake Rabbi Meir. Clearly, this Mishnah does not follow Rabbi Meir. The Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir kevan the Amar Terei Kiddushay Alevisha Avid Lehu Hachanami LeAvid Terei Kiddushay Alevisha. That there's a machloket, as we're about to see, between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. The Chachamim say that we know that every time the Kohen Gadol changes clothing, he has to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, which means he has to wash his hands and his feet. Right? We see that again and again in the Avodat Yom Kippurim. So what happens is, according to the Chacham, the question is why he does it twice. Okay? Normally he does it twice. So normally it will say, he washes his hands, takes off the golden garments, puts on the white garments, and washes his hands again. And then when he changes, he's going to wash his hands, take off the golden garments, put on the white garments, wash his hands again. Now here, when he takes off his secular garments, okay, his mundane garments, he comes wearing Levi's jeans and a t-shirt, okay? So when he shows up, he takes it off, and he goes to the mikveh, and he puts on the big de zahav. That's the first thing that he does. Now when he puts on the big de zahav, he washes his hands, and he washes his feet. But he didn't have to wash his hands and feet when he took off the Levi's jeans and the t-shirt.
That's the 10th sanctification they are talking about.
Right, but we're just pointing out that the first time he changes, in other words, when he first shows up and he's going to take off his jeans and his shirt, okay, he doesn't have to wash his hands and feet for the first one. Which means, when does he wash his hands and feet? Only when he's switching from Big De Kodesh to Big De Kodesh, okay? When he's taking off Big De Kodesh, he has to put it on, he has to wash his hands and feet. And when he's putting on Big De Kodesh, he has to wash his hands and feet. But when he's taking off Big De Chol, he doesn't have to wash his hands and feet. That is a machloket between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. The Chachamim say, why does he do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim 2 times? Because one is for taking off holy garments, one is for putting on holy garments. Rabbi Meir says no. He does it twice for the putting on. That's what we're going to see. Okay? So in other words, for putting on the garments, you have to wash your hands and feet once before you put them on and once after you put them on. That's why he does it twice every time. So when he puts on, in other words, how he understands it is, when he puts on the golden garments, he should really be, when he takes off his Levi's jeans and everything, wash his hands and feet, put on the golden garments, wash his hands and feet again. Then when he goes to switch to white garments, he should wash his hands and feet after he takes off the golden garments, and wash his hands and feet again when he puts on the white garments, because they're both for the white garments. In other words, according to Rabbi Meir, you do it twice for the thing you're changing into, not for the thing you're changing from. So it wouldn't matter that you're changing from Levi's jeans and a t-shirt. All that matters is you're changing into golden garments. So according to Rabbi Meir, you should have to do 2 Kiddushei Yadayim V'Raglayim, even in the beginning. For taking off the Levi's jeans, you wash your hands and feet, and then wash your hands and feet after. In other words, according to Rabbi Meir, it's before you put on the Big Day Kodesh and after you put on the Big Day Kodesh. It has nothing to do with what you took off. It has nothing to do with what you took off. So therefore, in our Mishnah we see that the Kohen that shows up in his regular mundane clothes, he only has to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim once, which means that for putting on, you only require 1 Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, not 2. That's the Chachamim, not Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir would say even the first time he puts on the Bigdei Zahav, he has to do it twice. Once before putting it on and once after. So Rav Papa tries to answer this. Rav Papa says, Amalu Rav Papa ben Rabbanan ben Rabbi Meir chad apshita de Bigdei Kodesh v'chad alavisha. No. Even Rabbi Meir agrees that when you do two kiddushay yadayim v'raglayim, one is for taking off and one is for putting on. And this is what they're arguing about. It says that he takes off the clothing, he washes up, and he puts on the clothing. Rabbi Meir savar makish pshita lelevisha. According to Rabbi Meir, we compare taking off clothing to putting on clothing. Just like when he puts on clothes, let's say he's switching from the golden to the white. So when he puts on the white, he gets dressed in the white, and then he washes his hands and feet. Pshita. So too with the taking off. Poshet ve'achar kach mekadesh. He takes off the clothing and then washes his hands and feet. Okay? In other words, the order would be like this. Take off the golden garments, wash your hands and feet. Put on the white garments, wash your hands and feet. Whereas the Chachamim say, the rabbis say, "V'Rabbanan savrei makish pshita levisha," that we compare taking off to putting on. Ma levisha kshu lavush mekadesh, af pshita kshu lavush mekadesh. The rabbis will say no. Just like when it comes to putting on, he's dressed when he washes his hands and feet. So too, when it comes to taking off, he's still dressed when he washes his hands and feet. So in other words, according to the way Rav Papa is learning it, it goes like this. Let's say the Kohen Gadol is switching from golden garments to white garments. So according to the rabbis, he does this. Wash your hands and feet, take off the golden garments, put on the white garments, wash your hands and feet. It's A, B, B, A, right? According to Rabbi Meir, it goes like this. Take off the golden garments, wash your hands and feet. Put on the white garments, wash your hands and feet. That's the way that Rabbi Meir looks at it. So in other words, the question is, when you wash your hands and feet the first time, is it before you take off the clothes or after? But everybody agrees, Rav Papa is saying, everybody agrees that both of these washings of the hands and feet are to prepare you for the new clothes you're putting on, for the white clothing, not for what you're taking off.
The early question is, do you wash your hands and feet before you take out the Bigdei Chol?
That's the question that they're asking. Rav Papa is saying maybe everybody agrees when you take off the Bigdei Chol, you don't have to wash your hands and feet. Why? Because the only reason you're washing your hands and feet is for the new ones. Okay? Maybe that's why. It's only for putting it on.
Right, it makes sense.
Yeah. So if that's the case, then everyone would agree that when you're taking off the chol, you don't have to worry about washing your hands and feet, right? So, in other words, they both agree that the only time you need washing. Let me just restate that because it wasn't clear. They both agree that the washing is only relevant to Bigdei Kodesh. It's only relevant to holy clothing. It's not that Rebbe Meir says you need 2 washings of the hands and feet for the new clothing you're putting on. That's not what he says. He says, Rav Papa is now saying that everyone agrees 1 washing is for the clothes you're taking off, 1 washing is for the clothes you're putting on. That's why even Rebbe Meir will say that when you're taking off Bigdei Chol, you don't need to wash. The only question is, what's the proper order? Do you first take off the clothes, then wash? Or do you wash and then take off the clothes? But everybody agrees in this version of Rav Papa, everybody agrees that the first washing is for the clothes you're taking off. And that's why everybody will agree, Rav Papa says, that when you take off Bigdei Chol, you don't have to wash.
So nobody brings in the possibility that you're actually washing for the Bigdei Kodesh, but you're doing it
twice.
But you're doing it before you're taking out the Bigdei Kodesh.
That's what the first assumption was of Rabbi Meir.
For the Bigdei
Kodesh. And that was the first assumption. In other words, the rabbis were assuming, they were saying, well, if Rabbi Meir says that the reason you're washing your hands and feet is all for the Bigdei Kodesh, and it doesn't matter what you're taking off, then why doesn't it say in our Mishnah that he has to wash his hands and feet twice when he puts on the Bigdei Kodesh? Since in every other case, according to Rabbi Meir, why are you washing your hands and feet? For what you're putting on. So Rav Papa says, no, that's not true. Even Rabbi Meir agrees that the reason you wash twice is once for what you're taking off and once for what you're putting on. That's why when you're taking off the regular street clothes, you don't have to wash. You don't have to wash twice. Okay? But the Gemara is going to say that's not true. So now, Amrulei, Rabbanan, the Rav Papa, the other rabbi said to Rav Papa, wait a second. You're trying to convince us that the only argument, but that really Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim agree, that the only reason why you wash your hands and feet is, in other words, you wash your hands and feet first to take off Big Day Kodesh and then to put on Big Day Kodesh. Everybody agrees you only do it, that you do it once for the taking off and once for the putting on. And the only argument between them is what's the order? Is the order take off, wash, put on, wash? Or is the order wash, take off, put on, wash? That's the only question, right? But that's not true. Because we learned in a Braita, because in a Braita it says that they would spread out the linen between the Kohen Gadol and the people. He took off his clothes, went into the mikveh, got up, and dried off. They brought the golden garments. He put them on, and then he washed his hands and feet. Rabbi Meir Omer, Pashat v'kidesh yadav v'raglav, v'yarad v'taval, alav v'nistapag, heviu lo b'gdei zahav, v'lavash v'kidesh yadav v'raglav. In other words, here's a Braita that proves that the way the Rabbanan were learning it was correct. That Rabbi Meir actually does say that when you take off your street clothes, you have to wash your hands and feet. Then you go to the mikveh, then you come out of the mikveh, you dry off, you put on the big day zahav, and you wash your hands and feet. So he would say that you have to wash your hands and feet twice. So according to Rabbi Meir, what's the halacha? The halacha is that you're always washing your hands and feet for what you're putting on, not what you're taking off. So when you took off the big day chol and you washed your hands and feet, you were doing it because you're preparing for what you're going to put on. So it doesn't matter that what you took off was big day chol. The rabbis say no, the first washing of hands and feet is for the taking off. Therefore, when you're taking off Big Day Chol, it doesn't make any sense to wash your hands and feet because they're not holy. So, what does that prove? That proves that our assumption about Rabbi Meir was correct.
It changes the nature of why you wash your hands.
Right, of course.
Right, do you wash your hands because you have to have clean hands when you're wearing clean garment, or why would you wash your hands to take off?
It seems like according to Rabbi Meir, there's in other words, it's all for what you're about for the future, not for the past, right? So when you take off the Big Day Chol, you're saying, I'm done with Big Day Chol, I'm washing my hands from that. You go into the mikveh, you come out, you dry up, and then you say.
It makes more sense to do it after you take off the big day chol. If you
right.
Either way.
Right. Well, they will say that you don't have any. They will say you don't have any washing when you take off big day chol.
I think all this washing hand business, it's not because the hands are dirty.
No, it's symbolic. It's symbolic. It's symbolic. But the chidush here is that according to Rabbi Meir, it's all about what you're going to put on. We don't care that you took off big day chol. According to the Chachamim, it's you took off big day kodesh. You also have to wash your hands and feet because you took off big day kodesh.
Rabbi, he did bracha each time.
No, there's no bracha. No. So the thing is that with the big day chol, according to Chachamim, that when you wash your hands for taking off, it has to do with the taking off. So when you're taking off big day chol, there's no washing.
Well, to me, the other way to look at it is that does the act of taking off your big day chol renders your hand tummy again?
But you're doing it after you take off the big day chol.
Right. But so if you were doing it before, right? Does that render your hands tummy? Does that act render your hand tummy?
Not necessarily. No, it shouldn't. It shouldn't.
Because then, what would be the reason to do it?
It shouldn't be. It's all symbolic. In other words, according to Rabbi Meir, in order to heighten the kiddusha or whatever, however you want to say it, of the putting on of the new clothes, you have to do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim twice. According to the Chachamim, one is saying goodbye to the Big Day Kodesh number one. One is saying hello to Big Day Kodesh number two.
What is it you attach it to?
Right, what do you attach it to? What is it coming with? Yeah. Is it a moving towards the new thing? Or is it one saying goodbye to the old thing and one saying hello to the new thing? You could look at it that way. But either way, the Chachamim, it turns out, were correct. Rav Papa was wrong. But Rabbi Meir would say that when you take off the Big Day Chol, when the Kohen Gadol takes off the Big Day Chol, he does have to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, and then do it again when he puts on the Big Day Zahav.
Right.
There you go. So now, what does Rabbi Papa say? Amar Lahu, Itanya Tanya. Fine, I was wrong. If it's in a Braita, it's in a Braita. I tried to defend the Mishnah. Rav Papa wanted to say that everybody would agree with our Mishnah, even Rabbi Meir. So he wasn't able to do that, so he said, fine, if it says that in the Brighton. We understand the Rabbi Meir. Now, according to Rabbi Meir, we have 5 tevilot and 10 kiddushin. Why? Because every time the Kohen Gadol goes to the mikveh, what does he do? Washes his hands and feet. Twice. Even the first time, he washes his hands and feet twice. One for taking off Bigdei Chol, one for putting on Bigdei Kodesh. It's not for that, but I mean one after taking off Bigdei Chol, one. But according to the Chachamim, the first Tevilah you have only one Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim when you put on the Bigdei Zahav, because you didn't have to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim when you took off the Bigdei Chol. So you have only one Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, and then you have 4 more Tevilot. Each one has 2 Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim, one for taking off, one for putting on. So in the total, according to the Chachamim, you only have 9. 4 times 2 is 8, plus the 1, because you have 5 tevilot.
So wait, so you have the Bigdei Kodesh, and you're going to go from Bigdei Kodesh to Bigdei Kodesh. So you wash, take off, you wash, and then you wash again before?
No. So
it's not
the first time, there are 5 tevilot. 5 times that the Kohen goes to the mikveh fully.
Total,
so the first one is he comes in.
Right. You just take off, right?
Go to the mikveh. Put on Bigdei Zahav. Wash hands and feet. That's one.
Okay.
Second time he comes to put on Bigdei Lavan. So what does he do? Washes his hands. Takes off Bigdei Lavan. Bigdei Zahav. Goes to the mikveh. Comes out, dries up. Puts on Bigdei Lavan. Washes again. So that's 2.
3.
That's 3 kiddushim, right? Then for the third tevilah, okay, when he has to switch back to the Bigdei Zahav again, so he washes his hands and feet.
He washes first.
Go to the mikveh, takes them off, goes to the mikveh, puts on Bigdei Zahav again,
and then washes again.
And washes again. So it turns out to be.
Fourth one, in other words, he washes again first before taking off.
He does before and after every time except the first time. So since the first time he only does 1, so that leaves you with only 9.
Okay, so that's fine.
Right. So according to Rabbi Meir, we understand, because according to Rabbi Meir, even in the first one he did it twice. So he's good. He's got 10.
Right.
Because the first time, they'll say it's even. Everyone is even. They're all the same. But according to the Chachamim, where's your 10th one? So Amru lach Rabbanan. Amre lach Rabbanan, the rabbis will tell you, Kiddusha batra, ki pashit bigdei kodesh, v'lavish bigdei chol avid le. So avid le hatam. So they'll say that the when he comes to take off bigdei kodesh the last time, okay, when he comes to take off Bigdei Kodesh last time, he has to do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim again. In other words, when the whole thing is over, when the whole avodah is over, completely done, and he's going to go into his street clothes and leave, he has to wash his hands and feet again. Why? So that makes perfect sense. So it works out perfectly. Because according to Rabbi Meir, why do you wash your hands and feet each time? You do it twice for the thing you're changing into. So in the first tevilah you're changing into Bigdei Zahav, you do it twice. Yeah. Second tevilah you're changing into Bigdei Lavan, you do it twice. Third time you're changing into Bigdei Zahav again, you do it twice. Fourth time you're changing into Bigdei Lavan again, you do it twice. Fifth time you're doing into the Bigdei Zahav again, you do it twice. And then, but then at the end you just take off the clothes and go home.
No, because after taking it off, because you have...
No, Rabbi Meir doesn't hold that. Rabbi Meir says you only do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim for what you're going to do. For what you're going to do.
Service.
Right? So he's going to say, you're leaving now.
You're going home.
You're changing to street clothes. So in other words, he adds 1 at the beginning because he says that you do 2 for putting on the Bigdei Zahav. The Chachamim say, no, you do only 1 because you're taking off Bigdei Chol. Right? So they're -1 in the beginning. But at the end, when you take off the holy garments for the last time and you go into Bigdei Chol, there you're going to see the machloket express itself again. Because the Chachamim will say, no, the first Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim in each set is for the taking off. And you're taking off Bigdei Kodesh for 1 last time. You only do it 1 time because what you're putting on is Bigdei Chol. Right? So therefore, they add 1 at the end. Rabbi Meir would say, no, you only do Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim for what you're putting on. And since at the end you are taking off and not putting on any Bigdei Kodesh, there's 0 at the end. So he adds 1 at the beginning, subtracts 1 at the end. They subtract 1 at the beginning, add 1 at the end. But at the end of the day, each one comes up with the same of 10 Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim.